Our latest writers group meeting at the public library centered around this exhibit they've got. They took out a chunk of the wall, glass panels and supports and everything, and brought in a fire engine to put it inside the library, which is going to be there for a while. I mean, we just wondered how much this must have all cost, and how many times they could have advertised our writers group in their newsletter for the same amount of money. But anyway, we decided to make the best of this thing and have a meeting centered around using the fire engine as a prop and a prompt for writing. It had a number of strange terms in it. One of them was like an oscillator, and there's other ones that there's terms that sound so obscure, they're like something out of science fiction, so they were good for writing prompt. And there were these gauges and things that had to do with flow and pressure, and then there was this mysterious label on the roof that said Captain Self-Eject. Wondering if that might be a character's name. We made one up in fiction. And also, there was no apparent means of ejection. There was no skylight or anything that would open up like a fighter plane to let the captain out. So it didn't look like a very good idea to try to use it. There were also a lot of bells and whistles on the thing. There were buttons you could press to make the siren or the horn sounds. So it was a pretty loud thing to have in what we usually think of as a library. So one of the resulting stories from this was the attempt to find a quiet place in the library to write the story. We managed to get the room because somebody who had booked it, or the group that had booked it, didn't show up. So after some consultation with the security guards and the librarians, we got in and managed to use the room. And then after brainstorming a bit, one of the other people turned on music, so I had to get out of there to write. So first I went from a spot where there's all the distractions from the fire engine and then the music playing, and then I went up onto one of the other floors and tried to find a quiet place there, and someone else was talking. Just, I guess they must have had earphones or connections to a phone that I couldn't see. But just like she was just talking and there's nobody else there. And it sounded a little bit like the conversation you usually pay about $3.99 a minute to hear, or that it's advertised for that. So that meant I had to move again. And before I did, though, I saw the librarian using these specialized gloves. They're like grippy on one side and slippy on the other, and I was fascinated with these gloves and asked the book reshelver what they were like, and she let me touch them, and they're all smooth on one side. So it was, what ended up being written from that was like a collection of attempts to try and get away from all these things that are versions of sexual fantasy. Like the firefighter is the number one, essentially, fantasy occupation for men, at least. For women's jobs, one of them is the librarian, ironically. The other top one, I guess, is probably a nurse or something like that. So that's how some of the stories got steered. One of them had to do with obsessions with beauty, and everybody had access to this beauty cream that made them all blah, made them all the same, even though they were beautiful, and wiped out some of their powers that they had. So there was like a stress call from this civilization that had discovered this beauty cream. Another one was about our attempts to escape other story conventions that keep us locked in, so the attempt to eject from previous literary convention. And finally, there was a story using all the strange terminology and all the arcane technical terms written inside the fire engine and all the bells and whistles, about someone hijacking or just taking a fire engine to get to an appointment, and all the mishaps and strange things that happened along the way, trying to work out how the fire engine worked and figure out what all of its strange attachments were for, with some accidents produced along the way. What is really funny about this is that just the day after I got the news that somebody actually had hijacked an emergency vehicle just a couple blocks away from where we'd had the meeting. So it became a case of life imitating art. But one of the more interesting props we had was the idea of having an out-of-body experience at point of death, which could happen in some of these emergencies, and then just finding that the alternate reality, the afterlife, apparently was just a blank. There was nothing else there, so it was like a blank page. So perhaps one's preparation for the afterlife is to get some practice writing fiction, so that if you're in a place that's just nothing there, you can start designing your own afterlife environment.